courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension as whispers and murmurs floated among the audience. The trial had gripped the small town for weeks, an unsettling case of a man accused of murdering his wife. The accused, Harold Whitmore, sat rigidly at the defendant's table, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. His once pristine suit was slightly wrinkled, a testament to the sleepless nights he had endured. But Harold's face told a different story. His gaze was cold, almost detached. The prosecution laid out their case with clinical precision. Blood evidence, inconsistent alibis, and the victim's diary pointed squarely to Harold. Yet his defense attorney argued relentlessly, painting a picture of a devoted husband wrongfully accused. As the judge began summarizing the testimonies, the tension grew unbearable. The audience leaned forward in their seats, waiting for the inevitable verdict. It was then that the doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. A young girl no older than 9 stepped inside, her small frame dwarfed by the cavernous room. Her presence was a stark contrast to the solemnity of the trial. Dressed in a faded blue dress with her hair in disarray, she clutched a battered teddy bear. The courtroom fell silent. "Who is that?" someone whispered, breaking the heavy quiet. The girl walked slowly down the aisle, her shoes echoing on the polished floor. Her wide, unblinking eyes scanned the room as if she were searching for something or someone. "Excuse me, young lady," the judge said, his tone a mixture of irritation and confusion. "This is a private proceeding. You can't be here." The girl stopped in the middle of the courtroom, staring directly at Harold Whitmore. The air seemed to grow colder. "He's lying," the girl said softly, her voice carrying an unnatural weight for someone so young. The judge's gavel struck the podium. "Miss, you can't disrupt these proceedings. Bailiff, escort her out." Before the bailiff could move, the girl raised her hand, silencing the room. Her gaze never left Harold, whose face had turned an alarming shade of white. "Daddy is lying," she said louder this time, pointing a trembling finger at the defendant. A collective gasp rippled through the room. "I'm sorry, who are you?" the judge asked, his voice laced with confusion. "I'm Emily," she said, her voice eerily calm. "I'm his daughter." The statement sent a wave of shock through the courtroom. Harold's attorney leaned in to whisper something, but Harold remained frozen, his lips pressed into a thin line. "I thought Harold Whitmore had no children," one of the reporters murmured. The judge cleared his throat. "Young lady, this trial is about the death of Harold Whitmore's wife. I failed to see how." "She wasn't his first," Emily interrupted, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "What?" the judge said, his stern demeanor faltering. Emily stepped forward, her small hands gripping the edge of the wooden barrier that separated the public gallery from the courtroom floor. Her expression was devoid of the innocence one might expect from a child. "She wasn't his first," Emily repeated. "She wasn't the first one he hurt." Harold stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Stop this," he barked, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and panic. "I don't know this girl. She's lying." Emily tilted her head, her unblinking gaze drilling into Harold. "Do you remember the house on Sycamore Lane, Daddy? Do you remember the basement?" The room felt like it had been plunged into icy silence. Every eye was on Harold, who was now visibly shaking. "What is this nonsense?" Harold stammered. "This is absurd. She's just a child." But Emily didn't waver. "You buried them there. All of them. Mom wasn't the first, and she won't be the last." The judge banged his gavel again, though his composure had clearly been shaken. "Enough. This is highly irregular. Bailiff, remove her at once." The bailiff hesitated, glancing nervously at Emily. Her presence was unnerving, as though an invisible force radiated from her small frame. "Check the basement," Emily said quietly, her voice now barely above a whisper. "You'll find them there." At that moment, Harold lunged toward her, his face contorted with fury. "You little s—" The bailiff and Harold's attorney restrained him, struggling to pull him back. The courtroom erupted into chaos, gasps and shouts blending into a cacophony of noise. Emily stood perfectly still, watching Harold with an unnerving calm. "Stop," Harold screamed. "Get her out of here." "She's lying." But his protests only made the room more uneasy. The judge called for order, his gavel pounding against the podium. "This proceeding is adjourned until further notice," he announced. As the crowd began to disperse, reporters swarmed the bailiff, demanding answers about the mysterious girl. But Emily was gone. The judge ordered an investigation into her claims, and within days, law enforcement descended upon the old house on Sycamore Lane. What they found in the basement made national headlines: a grisly collection of skeletal remains, each bearing signs of violent ends. Harold Whitmore's trial took a dark turn. Emily's claims were validated by the horrific discoveries, but the mystery of her identity remained unsolved. No records of a daughter could be found. The story gripped the nation, and speculation ran rampant. Who was Emily? How did she know such details about Harold's crimes? Late one night, a detective assigned to the case found an old photograph buried in the archives. It was dated over a decade earlier and showed Harold with a young girl in a blue dress, clutching a teddy bear. Scrawled on the back of the photo in faded ink was a single word: Emily. The detective's blood ran cold as he realized the truth. Emily had died in a house fire years ago, a fire Harold had narrowly escaped. But if Emily was dead, who, or what, had interrupted the trial?
The aftermath of the trial's disruption by Emily left the entire town in shock. Harold Whitmore, once a respected figure in the community, was now branded as a monster. The discovery of the remains in the basement of his old home on Sycamore Lane sealed his fate, but the questions surrounding Emily's appearance only deepened the mystery. The photograph uncovered by Detective Rowan sent chills through the investigation team. It wasn't just a faded image of a little girl that was haunting. It was the date scrawled on the back. The photograph had been taken over 12 years ago, a full decade before Harold's current trial, and it confirmed something terrifying. Emily had been real, or she had been once. Late that night, Detective Rowan sat at his desk, staring at the photograph. The edges of the paper were curled, and the ink on the back seemed to bleed into the grain of the card. He turned the photo over again and again, as if the answers to his questions might emerge from the dim light of his desk lamp. The fire that had claimed Emily's life had been ruled an accident, a faulty gas line that ignited while Harold was supposedly away on a business trip. Emily and her mother, Harold's first wife, had perished in the blaze. Harold's grief had been public and theatrical, a man devastated by the loss of his family. But now, with the bodies discovered in his basement, Rowan couldn't shake the feeling that Harold's grief had been a performance. The house on Sycamore Lane had been thoroughly searched, but one detail stuck out to Rowan: the basement's peculiar layout. The stone walls were uneven, with some sections crudely patched over. The forensics team had unearthed several remains, but Rowan felt sure there was more hidden beneath the surface. Unable to sleep, Rowan grabbed his coat and headed out. The drive to Sycamore Lane was eerily quiet. The once grand house loomed against the black sky, its silhouette broken and menacing. Police tape fluttered weakly in the night breeze, a futile attempt to contain the darkness within. Rowan parked his car and hesitated. His flashlight cut through the darkness as he stepped onto the overgrown lawn. The house seemed to exhale around him, its windows like empty eyes watching his every move. He entered the house cautiously, the wooden floorboards creaking beneath his weight. Dust particles floated in the air, illuminated by the narrow beam of his flashlight. He made his way to the basement door, which hung ajar. The smell hit him first, a faint but undeniable odor of decay. The forensics team had taken most of the evidence, but something lingered in the air, as if the house itself was steeped in the memories of violence. Rowan descended the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The basement walls were uneven, the stone glistening with moisture. He ran his hand along one of the patched sections, feeling the roughness of the cement. And then he saw it, a faint impression, almost invisible to the naked eye. It looked like a handprint pressed into the cement, small and delicate, as if a child had touched it before the cement had dried. Rowan's breath hitched. He crouched down, shining his flashlight over the area. The handprint was unmistakable, its edges slightly smeared, as though the child had tried to pull away. "Emily," he whispered, his voice trembling. The room seemed to shift around him. The air grew colder, and the faint sound of footsteps echoed behind him. Rowan whipped around, his flashlight darting across the room. "Hello," he called, his voice bouncing off the stone walls. Silence. But then, faintly, a child's laughter echoed through the basement. It wasn't cheerful or playful. It was hollow, almost mechanical, as though it had been stripped of emotion. Rowan's heart pounded as he scanned the room. The laughter grew louder, reverberating through the small space until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Detective," a voice whispered, so close it felt like it was right next to him. Rowan spun around, but there was no one there. The beam of his flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows on the walls. "Who's there?" Rowan demanded, his voice cracking. The laughter stopped abruptly, plunging the room into an oppressive silence. And then he saw her. Emily stood at the far end of the basement, her blue dress glowing faintly in the darkness. Her hair hung limply around her face, and her wide eyes reflected the beam of his flashlight. She clutched her teddy bear tightly, its button eyes missing, leaving empty sockets. "Emily?" Rowan whispered, his voice barely audible. She tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice echoing unnaturally. Rowan began, but the words caught in his throat. "You can't stop him," Emily continued. "He'll always find a way." "Who? Harold? He's in custody. He can't hurt anyone anymore." Emily's lips curled into a sad smile. "It's not just him. It's the house. It remembers. It keeps them here." Rowan felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean? Who does it keep?" Emily raised her hand and pointed to the patched section of the wall. "Them," she said simply. Rowan's flashlight flickered again, and when it stabilized, Emily was gone. A sudden banging noise erupted from behind the wall, as though something, or someone, was trying to break through. The sound grew louder, more desperate, and Rowan stumbled backward, his heart racing. The handprint in the cement seemed to glow faintly, and Rowan could swear he saw it move, the fingers curling slightly. "No," he muttered, backing away. "This isn't real." The banging grew deafening, and cracks began to form in the cement. Rowan turned and bolted up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind him. He didn't stop running until he was back in his car, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life, and he sped away from the house, the laughter of a child ringing in his ears. Harold Whitmore sat in the sterile holding cell of the county jail, his expression eerily calm. The news of his crimes had spread like wildfire, yet he maintained his composure, even as accusations piled against him. He knew something the others didn't, something that allowed him to sit in quiet confidence while the world outside unraveled. Detective Rowan, however, was far from composed. The events of the previous night haunted him. Emily's voice, her cryptic warning, and the inexplicable handprint in the basement replayed in his mind like a broken record. He tried to rationalize it, but the memory of that childlike laughter left him cold. Rowan knew he couldn't walk away from this, no matter how much he wanted to. Something darker was at play, and Harold wasn't the only threat. If the house remembered, as Emily claimed, then there was more to discover, more than Rowan wanted to admit. Later that afternoon, Rowan reluctantly met with Harold in the interrogation room. The dimly lit room was cold, the walls stained with years of tension and confessions. Harold sat across the table, shackled but smug. "Detective Rowan," Harold said, his voice calm and condescending. "I didn't think you'd come back after what happened last night." Rowan stiffened. "How do you know about that?" Harold smiled faintly, leaning back in his chair. "You think you're the first person that house has played tricks on? You're not, and you won't be the last." "What do you mean? What is that house, Harold? Why does it keep them there?" Harold's smile widened. "That house is more than wood and stone, detective. It's a keeper, a guardian, if you will. It feeds on secrets, thrives on the things people bury. It doesn't just hold the dead, it owns them." Rowan felt a chill creep up his spine, but kept his voice steady. "You killed them. All those people buried in the basement. That's on you, not the house. Harold chuckled softly. Do you think I chose them, detective? The house chooses. It shows you who needs to stay, who it wants to keep. I'm just the hand it uses to do its work. Rowan's fists clenched under the table. You're insane. Am I? Harold leaned forward, his eyes glinting with an unnatural light. You've seen her, haven't you? Emily. Sweet little Emily. She's still there, isn't she? Rowan's breath hitched. He didn't respond. She's the house's favorite, you know, Harold continued. A perfect little ghost. Innocent, curious, and oh, so obedient. She warned you, didn't she? Told you to stay away. Rowan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You'll never leave that cell, Harold. Never? Harold smirked. You can't stop it, detective. The house always wins. That night, Rowan found himself drawn back to Sycamore Lane. No amount of rational thought or self-preservation could keep him away. Emily's words echoed in his mind. You can't stop him. He'll always find a way. The house stood as it always had, dark and foreboding. The police tape fluttered in the wind, a futile attempt to keep people out. Rowan hesitated at the gate, his heart pounding. He wasn't alone. A young woman stood by the gate, staring at the house with a mixture of fear and determination. She was in her early 20s, her dark hair tied back in a loose ponytail. Who are you? Rowan asked, his voice cautious. The woman turned, her eyes red from crying. My name's Mia. Emily was my sister. Rowan's jaw tightened. You're Emily's sister? But that's impossible. Mia interrupted. I know. I wasn't even born when she died. My mom, she told me about her. She said Emily's death broke our family. But lately, I've been dreaming about her, hearing her voice. She keeps calling me to this house. Rowan's stomach churned. You shouldn't be here. It's not safe. Mia shook her head. I have to be here. Emily's trying to tell me something. Rowan sighed. He knew it was dangerous to go back inside, but leaving Mia alone wasn't an option. Together, they crossed the threshold into the house. The air was heavy, and the temperature seemed to drop with every step they took. The house creaked and groaned as if alive, watching their every move. Emily? Mia called softly. A faint whisper answered, drifting down from the second floor. Mia! Rowan's blood ran cold. Mia turned to Rowan, her eyes wide. She's here. Against his better judgment, Rowan followed Mia up the staircase. Each step felt like an eternity, the air thick with tension. The whispering grew louder, guiding them to a locked door at the end of the hallway. Mia hesitated, her hand trembling as she reached for the doorknob. It's okay, Rowan said, his voice steadier than he felt. Mia turned the knob, and the door creaked open. Inside was a small, dusty bedroom. A single bed sat in the corner, its sheets yellowed with age. Toys were scattered across the floor, untouched for years. On the bed sat Emily, her form faint and flickering like a dying light bulb. She looked up at Mia, her expression filled with longing. Mia, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mia stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. Emily, I'm here. I'm here. Emily reached out, her small hand trembling. You have to stop him. You have to break the circle. What circle? What are you talking about? Rowan asked, stepping beside Mia. Emily's eyes filled with tears. The house, it's a trap. It keeps us here. The ones he hurt. It won't let us go. You have to destroy it. Burn it. Rowan exchanged a glance with Mia. If we destroy the house, will it set you free? Emily nodded. But hurry. He's coming. Who? Mia asked, panic rising in her voice. The room grew colder, and the shadows on the walls began to shift. A deep, guttural laugh echoed through the house, sending chills down their spines. Him, Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Rowan grabbed Mia's hand. We need to leave. Now. But the door slammed shut behind them, and the laughter grew louder. The house wasn't going to let them go easily. The laughter echoing through the house was unlike anything Rowan or Mia had ever heard. Deep, guttural, and resonant, as if coming from the walls themselves. The shadows writhed unnaturally, their forms stretching and shifting like living entities. The room seemed to close in around them, suffocating in its malevolence. Mia clutched Rowan's arm, her knuckles white. "What's happening?" Rowan pulled her behind him instinctively, his voice low but steady. "The house." Harold wasn't lying. "It's alive." Emily's ghostly form flickered near the bed, her small figure trembling as the shadows moved closer. "You have to run. You can't fight it while you're inside." But the door behind them was sealed tight, the handle immovable despite Rowan's efforts. The laughter crescendoed, joined now by whispers, thousands of voices overlapping in a macabre symphony. "It doesn't want us to leave," Rowan muttered, his heart pounding. Mia turned to Emily. "You said we have to destroy it. How? Tell us what to do." Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. "You have to burn it down. Everything. But it won't let you. It'll try to stop you." As if in response to her warning, the shadows lunged forward, twisting into grotesque, clawed forms. Rowan grabbed a rusted lamp from the bedside table, swinging it wildly to keep the entities at bay. The lamp passed through them harmlessly, but the effort kept the advancing darkness momentarily at a distance. "Move!" Rowan shouted, dragging Mia toward the window. The glass was thick with grime, but Rowan could see the faint glow of the streetlights outside. Without hesitation, he smashed the window with the lamp, shards of glass scattering across the floor. "Go!" he yelled, boosting Mia toward the opening. Mia hesitated, looking back at Emily. "What about her?" Emily shook her head, her ghostly form already dimming. "I can't leave. The house owns me. But you can stop it. Please, do it for all of us." Tears streaming down her face, Mia nodded and climbed through the window, dropping into the bushes below. Rowan followed, the shadows surging toward him just as he leapt outside. Rowan and Mia stood on the overgrown lawn, breathing heavily as the house loomed before them. Its windows glared like empty eyes, and the laughter inside had quieted to a low, menacing hum. "We can't just leave it like this," Mia said, her voice shaky but determined. "Emily's trapped in there." "They all are." Rowan nodded, his mind racing. "We need accelerants, something to set it ablaze. Gasoline, lighter fluid, anything." Mia glanced at the abandoned garage beside the house. "There might be something in there." Rowan led the way, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The garage was cluttered with rusted tools, old paint cans, and decaying furniture. After several tense minutes of searching, Mia found a dusty canister of gasoline tucked behind a stack of tires. "This will work," she said, holding it up. Rowan grabbed it, his resolve hardening. "Let's finish this." As they approached the house, the air grew heavy, almost suffocating. The hum from inside had risen to an angry vibration, the house clearly aware of their intentions. Rowan poured gasoline around the perimeter, dousing the foundation and wooden walls. Mia followed, her eyes darting nervously at every creak and groan from the house. "It's watching us," she whispered. Rowan didn't respond, but he felt it too. The oppressive weight of unseen eyes bore down on them, and the shadows inside the house seemed to press against the windows, as if eager to escape. Once the gasoline was distributed, Rowan handed Mia a box of matches. "Do it. Light it." Mia hesitated, her hand trembling as she struck the first match. The tiny flame flickered in the wind, casting eerie shadows across her face. Suddenly, the front door slammed open with a deafening bang. A gust of wind blew the match out, and the house seemed to roar in fury. From the doorway emerged a figure, Harold Whitmore. Or rather, what was left of him. His body was grotesquely twisted, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The house had claimed him, and now he was its instrument. "You think you can destroy me?" Harold's voice was guttural, layered with countless others. "You're nothing. The house has been here long before you, and it will remain long after." Rowan stepped in front of Mia, his jaw set. "Get back, Mia. Light another match." Harold lunged forward with inhuman speed, his hands claw-like and his movements jerky, as if controlled by invisible strings. Rowan tackled him, the two of them crashing to the ground. "Now, Mia, do it!" Rowan shouted, struggling against Harold's unnatural strength. Mia struck another match, shielding the flame with her hand. She tossed it onto the gasoline-soaked ground, and the fire ignited instantly, roaring to life and spreading rapidly around the house. Harold let out an inhuman screech, his body convulsing as the flames licked at the wooden walls. The house seemed to scream with him, the low hum escalating into a deafening roar. Rowan scrambled to his feet, dragging Mia away as the fire consumed the structure. The flames danced higher, illuminating the night sky with a fiery glow. From a safe distance, Rowan and Mia watched as the house burned, its windows shattering and its walls collapsing under the intensity of the flames. The shadows inside writhed in agony, their forms dissolving into the fire. But the house didn't go quietly. A final, ear-splitting scream erupted from the inferno, shaking the ground beneath their feet. And then silence. As the fire died down, a strange calm settled over the scene. Rowan turned to Mia, who was staring at the smoldering ruins with tears in her eyes. "Do you think it's over?" she asked softly. Rowan hesitated, glancing back at the ruins. "I don't know, but I think we gave them a chance. Emily, the others, maybe they're free now." From the corner of his eye, Rowan thought he saw a small figure standing amidst the smoke. It was Emily, her face serene and her form fading into the dawn. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice carried on the wind. Rowan and Mia stood in silence as the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, signaling the end of a long and harrowing night. But deep in the ashes of Sycamore Lane, something stirred, a faint, rhythmic hum, barely audible yet undeniably present. The house might have been destroyed, but its memory remained. And memories, as Rowan had learned, were hard to bury. The dawn light bathed the ruins of Sycamore Lane in a strange, golden glow, but the air was still heavy. Rowan and Mia stood silently, the heat of the dying embers warming their faces. It was over, at least it seemed that way, yet Rowan couldn't shake the unease settling in his chest. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mia frowned, tilting her head to listen. The faintest of hums carried on the breeze, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably real. It wasn't the roaring malevolence of the house during its reign. This sound was subdued, but it carried a weight that hinted at something unresolved. "Rowan," Mia's voice wavered. "What if it's not gone?" He shook his head, unwilling to give voice to the gnawing doubt within him. "We burn it down. The house, the shadows, everything. It's done." But his own words felt hollow. They turned to leave, the crunch of gravel beneath their feet the only sound as they walked toward Rowan's car. The sense of relief they should have felt never came. Days passed, but the events of that night refused to release Rowan and Mia. Every shadow seemed to stretch too far. Every creak in the floorboards of their respective homes echoed louder than it should. Mia found herself glancing over her shoulder more often, the paranoia burrowing into her like a splinter. Rowan tried to move on, burying himself in his work. But the more he pushed the memories aside, the more persistent they became. He started dreaming of the house, of Emily's face, her small hand pressing against the glass as the fire consumed everything. One evening, as Rowan sat in his apartment, flipping aimlessly through old photos, his phone buzzed. It was Mia. "You need to come over," she said, her voice trembling. Something's wrong." When Rowan arrived at Mia's house, he found her pacing the living room. Her face was pale, her hands clutching a piece of crumpled paper. "What's going on?" Rowan asked, closing the door behind him. Wordlessly, Mia handed him the paper. It was a drawing, crudely sketched in what looked like charcoal. The image sent a chill down Rowan's spine. It was the house on Sycamore Lane, drawn in eerie detail. Flames surrounded it, but the house stood tall, its windows dark and menacing. "Where did you get this?" he asked. Mia pointed to her kitchen table, where several more sketches were scattered. "They just appeared. I didn't draw them, Rowan. They were here when I woke up." Rowan flipped through the drawings, each one more unsettling than the last. In one, shadowy figures clawed at the windows. In another, Emily stood in the doorway, her expression blank. The final sketch showed the house rebuilt, its structure towering even more ominously than before. "This isn't possible," Rowan muttered. "It's gone. We destroyed it." Mia shook her head. "The house might be gone, but whatever was inside it, it's not finished with us." The next night, Rowan and Mia found themselves drawn back to the ruins. Neither of them could explain the compulsion, but it felt as though the house were calling them. The air around the site was unnaturally still, the scorched earth radiating a faint warmth despite the cool night. Rowan's flashlight swept over the rubble, illuminating fragments of charred wood and shattered glass. "This doesn't feel right," Mia whispered. As they stepped deeper into the ruins, the hum returned, louder now, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. Rowan's flashlight flickered, the beam growing weaker with each step. And then, from the ashes, they saw it, a faint, glowing outline of the house, shimmering like a mirage. It was incomplete, a skeletal version of its former self, but it was unmistakably there. "No," Rowan breathed. "This can't be real." The hum grew louder, and the outline solidified, taking on more detail with each passing second. The front door creaked open, though no one touched it. Inside, the shadows waited, writhing and pulsating like a living organism. A voice drifted out, soft and sorrowful. "You shouldn't have come back." Rowan turned to see Emily standing behind them, her ghostly form even fainter than before. Her eyes were wide with fear. "You didn't destroy it," she said, her voice trembling. "You only made it angry." The ground beneath their feet began to quake as the house reformed itself. Rowan grabbed Mia's hand, pulling her away from the growing structure. "We need to leave now," he shouted. But Emily blocked their path, her expression desperate. "You can't leave. Not this time. It won't let you." "What do we do?" Mia cried. "How do we stop it?" Emily hesitated, her gaze darting to the glowing house. "It's tied to something, a relic, something it uses to anchor itself. Find it, destroy it, and it'll lose its hold." Rowan nodded, his mind racing. "Where is it?" Emily pointed to the basement, the faint glow of her finger tracing a path to the ruins. "It's hidden there. Hurry." Rowan and Mia made their way into the ruins, the air growing heavier with each step. The basement was a jagged pit of rubble, but in its center stood a stone altar, untouched by the fire. Upon it rested an ornate box, its surface etched with strange symbols. "This must be it," Rowan said, approaching the altar. The shadows surged toward them, furious and unrelenting. Rowan grabbed the box, but the moment his hands touched it, a searing pain shot through him. "Destroy it!" Emily's voice rang out. Mia grabbed a rusted pipe from the debris and swung it with all her strength, smashing the box into pieces. A deafening scream erupted from the shadows, the sound reverberating through the ruins. The glowing outline of the house flickered and dissolved, the shadows dissipating like smoke. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Rowan and Mia stood amidst the ruins, exhausted but alive. The oppressive energy that had hung over the site was gone, replaced by an almost eerie stillness. Emily appeared one final time, her form faint but peaceful. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. "It's over now." And with that, she was gone, her spirit finally free. Rowan and Mia left Sycamore Lane, the weight of their ordeal heavy on their shoulders. Though they knew they had destroyed the house and its dark influence, the memory of what they had faced would never fade. But for the first time in weeks, they felt something new, hope.